The stories. This motel room was a trap. The motel room was booked under a fake name, paid in cash, and cleaned like nobody had ever slept there. The only thing left behind was a keycard that did not match the door. On a Tuesday in late summer of 2013, Lyle Rourke drove 3 hours for a routine delivery run. He was 42, and he worked as a parts courier for a medical equipment distributor. His day was supposed to be simple because he only had 2 stops and one overnight. He planned to sleep at a roadside motel near the interstate, then finish the route at dawn. Lyle was not the kind of person who chased trouble, and his coworkers would say he avoided drama. He kept his receipts sorted, he drove the speed limit, and he liked quiet places with bright parking lots. He had a divorce in the rearview mirror and a new habit of staying sober on the road. That night, he wanted a shower, a microwave dinner, and 8 hours of sleep. The motel sat behind a truck stop, with a fading sign and a row of doors facing the lot. It was not fancy, but it looked maintained, and the lobby smelled like cleaner. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with a tired smile, and she asked for a card on file. Lyle handed over his company card, signed, and received a plastic key sleeve. The sleeve said Room 12, and the key card had a scribbled mark in black ink. Lyle parked close to his door because he carried a locked case in the back seat. The case held valve assemblies and sterile connectors, the kind that cost a lot and get stolen easily. He carried the case inside first, then returned for his duffel and a fast food bag. When he stepped back into the hallway, the air felt colder than it should have. The corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. Inside room 12, everything looked normal at first glance. The bed was made tight, the curtains were drawn, and the air conditioner hummed. A small television played a local news channel with the volume low. That was odd, because Lyle had not turned it on. He stood still and listened, and he heard a faint clicking sound behind the wall, like a relay switching. He checked the room quickly, because that was just how his brain worked. The bathroom was empty, the closet was empty, and the window latch was intact. He noticed the phone on the nightstand was unplugged, which made no sense for a motel. He also noticed the smoke detector had a newer cover plate than the one in the hallway. The screws looked clean, and the plastic was slightly different color. Lyle tried to ignore it because he was tired and he did not want to spiral. He ate half his dinner, took a shower, and set his alarm for 5:30. He placed the parts case under the table, then slid a chair in front of it. That was not a security system, but it made noise if somebody moved it. When he turned off the lights, the television was still on, and the remote was missing. At 10:47, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, "You picked the wrong room." Lyle sat up so fast his shoulder cramped. He stared at the screen and waited for a follow-up, but nothing came. He checked the curtains again, and he saw headlights sweep across the wall outside. A vehicle had pulled in, then shut off. Lyle did not call the front desk right away because he did not know what to say. He did not want to sound paranoid, and he did not want to start trouble for the clerk. He decided to leave in the morning and report it to his manager as a weird incident. He rolled onto his side and tried to sleep, but his mind kept grabbing details. The unplugged phone, the missing remote, the clean screws on the detector. At 11:12, the clicking behind the wall returned, louder this time. It happened in short bursts, like someone flipping a switch on and off. Then his phone buzzed again with another text. It said, "Don't open the door." Lyle held his breath, and the hallway outside went quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no ice machine, just the air conditioner and his own pulse. He stayed in bed with his phone in his hand, and he watched the clock change 1 minute at a time. At 11:20, something brushed the outside of his door, like fabric or a sleeve. The handle did not move, but the metal plate clicked softly. Lyle looked at the deadbolt, then looked at the peephole, and decided not to use it. He had no reason to believe the peephole was safe, and his instincts were already screaming. Instead, he opened his camera app and held the phone near the peephole without looking through. He recorded for 10 seconds, then pulled it back and watched the video. The hallway was dim and grainy, but it showed a person standing close, facing the door. The person wore a hooded jacket and gloves, and their face was angled away. They were holding something flat against the door, like a card or a thin tool. Lyle's hands shook, but he kept thinking in small steps. He texted the unknown number back. "Who is this?" The reply came fast, like the other person was waiting. It said, "Just stay quiet and don't touch the latch." Lyle typed, "Call the police." The reply was, "They won't make it in time. Listen to the clicks." As if on cue, the clicking behind the wall started again. This time, it was paired with a faint whirring sound, like a motor trying to start. Lyle sat up and put his ear against the wall near the nightstand. He could hear the relay click, then a low vibration, then stop. It sounded like something was drawing power, then failing. He remembered the smoke detector, and he stood up slowly. He kept his shoes on, and he kept the phone in his hand. He aimed the flashlight up at the detector cover plate, and he saw a tiny seam along the edge. The seam looked fresh, like it had been opened and closed. He stepped onto the chair and took one screw out, then another, moving carefully. The cover plate came down, and he saw a small camera module inside the detector housing. It was pointed toward the bed, and it had a thin wire running into the ceiling. Lyle felt sick, and he climbed down without touching anything else. He took a photo, then backed away like the device could bite him. The clicks started again, and he realized someone might be watching his movement live. He did not want to panic, but he also did not want to be trapped in a room built for that. He went to the bathroom and checked the vent cover, and he found it had been replaced too. The screws were newer, and there was a faint smear of adhesive on the edge. He touched nothing, but he took more photos with his phone. Then he heard a soft tap on the door, followed by a whisper he could not understand. Lyle typed another text to the unknown number. "Are you in the hallway?" The reply was, "No, but they are." He typed, "Who are they?" The reply was, "Wrong people, wrong day." Then the phone buzzed with a final line. It said, "When the clicks stop, move." Lyle realized the unknown number might be a staff member, or a guest, or even part of the trap. He did not know, but the warning matched what he was hearing. The clicks were tied to whatever was hidden in the wall, and whoever was outside might be trying to trigger something. He looked around the room for another exit, and there was only the window. The window faced the parking lot, but the curtains hid the view. Lyle pulled the curtain edge just enough to see outside, and he froze. A dark sedan was parked 2 spaces away with no front plate visible. The driver's seat was occupied, and the person inside was watching his door. In the glow of the lot light, Lyle saw a second person crouched near the door frame, working with a tool. Lyle stepped back from the window and tried to breathe. He considered calling 911, but his phone had one bar, and the call might fail. He also worried the room was wired for audio, and speaking could give them information. He chose the one thing that did not require talking. He started a voice memo without speaking, and he put the phone in his pocket. If something happened, at least the timestamp would exist. Then the click stopped, and the air conditioner cut out. The room went quiet in a sudden, unnatural way. Lyle felt the hair rise on his arms, because it sounded like the power had been interrupted. He heard the outside door handle jiggle once, then stop. He moved fast, because the warning said to move when it stopped. He grabbed his parts case and his duffel in one trip, and he went straight to the bathroom window. The bathroom had a smaller window, but it was closer to the side of the building and less visible. He pushed the window up and felt it stick, like fresh paint or tape on the track. He shoved again, harder, and it opened with a ripping sound. His heart slammed, because that noise would carry. He climbed out feet first, scraping his shin on the sill. The ground was gravel and damp grass, and it smelled like fuel from the truck stop. He crouched low and moved along the wall toward the corner. He heard voices now, still muffled, but close. Someone outside his door said, "He's still inside." Another voice replied, "Get the latch." Lyle kept moving, and he rounded the corner into deeper shadow. He ran behind a row of dumpsters, then into the bright truck stop lot. He did not look back, because he did not want to give himself away. He walked fast, then faster, and went inside the truck stop where people were awake. He headed to the cashier and said, "Call the police. Somebody is breaking into my room." When officers arrived, they did not treat it like a normal noise complaint. They spoke to Lyle in the truck stop booth area, and he showed them the photos. The camera in the smoke detector changed the mood immediately. The officers drove to the motel and found the door to room 12 slightly open with the latch plate scratched. The room lights were on, and the television was off now, as if someone had muted a scene. The sedan was gone, and so was the person Lyle had recorded at the peephole. The clerk insisted no one else had access to that room, and she denied any hidden devices. She also looked genuinely shocked when shown the photos, which did not prove innocence, but it did not look like an act. An officer called for a unit with technical training, and they asked the motel manager to unlock the electrical closet. Behind the wall, near room 12, they found a junction box with fresh tape and a spliced line. The splice fed power into a small control module mounted behind a loose panel. The module had a timer relay, the same kind used to cycle electricity on a schedule. It could cut the air conditioner, cut the lights, and send power to the ceiling wire. It was not a high-tech weapon, but it was enough to unsettle someone and control the room. The investigation stretched into weeks, and most of it played out in paperwork and interviews. Officers collected Lyle's phone video, his photos, and the voice memo timestamp. They obtained motel keycard logs and learned something simple but important. The key sleeve handed to Lyle was marked room 12, but the keycard itself had been encoded for room 16. The scribbled black ink mark was a quick cover, meant to hide the mismatch. That meant Lyle was never supposed to be in room 12, at least not according to the card. Somebody at the desk either made an error or someone swapped sleeves on purpose. The clerk swore she did not swap anything, and her shift had a gap where she left to restock towels. Cameras in the lobby were broken that week, and the manager admitted it casually. That detail made investigators look harder, because broken cameras are common excuses. A detective tracked down the unknown number that texted Lyle, and it led to a prepaid phone that could not be tied easily. Still, the detective pulled tower data and saw the prepaid phone was near the motel during the incident. It stayed close for 20 minutes, then moved east on the interstate. The device also pinged near a hardware store 2 towns over the next day, the same store that sold the relay module found in the wall. The twist arrived when the detective compared another report from 2 months earlier. A different motel in the same region had a similar complaint. A guest reported clicking sounds and strange texts. That guest left before police arrived, but they reported a hidden camera in a vent. The room number in that earlier report was also 12. It was not proof of a pattern, but it was a striking repeat. Investigators started looking at who requested room 12 and who paid cash. They found a run of cash bookings under fake names, always requesting end rooms and always leaving fast. The employees remembered the same detail: a dark sedan, no plate on the front, driver wearing a cap. No one had a clear face, but the pattern suggested the trap was for a specific kind of target. Lyle's company helped without meaning to, because they provided delivery manifests. One of Lyle's stops was a small clinic that had recently reported missing equipment. The missing items were similar to what criminals use to access controlled supplies. The detective thought someone might have assumed Lyle carried higher-value cargo. If a crew was targeting couriers, a motel room with a hidden camera could help them learn routines, codes, and storage habits. That theory fit the trap idea better than anything else. The room was wired to watch, the relay clicked as someone tested the system, and the person at the door used a tool to bypass the latch. The texts read like instructions from someone who knew the trap but wanted Lyle to survive it. That could have been a nervous accomplice, or a different guest who had been burned before. No one ever proved who sent the warnings, and that haunted the case file. The detective wrote it carefully, because guessing would be easy and useless. The official notes said the sender was unknown, possibly nearby, possibly involved, possibly a bystander. What mattered was that the warnings were accurate, and they likely kept Lyle alive. Lyle quit the courier job within a month, and he took a warehouse role closer to home. He told people he was tired of highways and cheap motels, and that was true enough. Privately, he kept thinking about the keycard, and how close a simple error came to saving him. If the card had matched the sleeve, he might have walked into room 16, and the trap might have stayed quiet. Instead, he landed in room 12 by mistake, and that mistake forced the trap to show itself. The clicks, the texts, the hidden camera, and the scratched latch were all pieces of a plan that did not account for a cautious person. Years later, the motel changed owners, and the sign was replaced with a brighter one. Room numbers were repainted, and the hallway lights stopped flickering. But the strange part is how small the difference was. Just one keycard, just one room number. The trap was built to feel normal until it was too late. And, for one night in 2013, it almost worked exactly as designed. The stories. The bus driver who turned back years later. The route ended early, and the radio kept talking after the bus went silent. Years later, the same driver returned to the last stop and found out why. Dorian Klein was 44 and worked weekday mornings for a regional transit contractor. He drove a long commuter loop through timber towns, then back toward the highway. That Tuesday started like any other, with coffee in a paper cup and a schedule clipped to plastic. He planned to finish the loop, fuel up, and be home before dark. The town was small enough that Dorian recognized most riders by their shoes. A nurse with squeaky clogs, a mill worker with orange earplugs, a student with a sketchbook. They nodded at him like he was part of the scenery, which he liked. The bus was old, but it ran, and the heater worked. His biggest worry that morning was a fog bank near the river bridge. Dispatch called him once to confirm a detour around a washout, and he read it back cleanly. The road was narrow, with tall firs and no shoulder in spots. Dorian kept both hands steady and watched for deer, then for loose gravel. The bus climbed into higher ground where cell service dropped to nothing. He passed the last convenience store and felt that familiar quiet settle in. At 11:30, he reached the turnaround near an abandoned rest area. It was a patch of cracked asphalt, a closed bathroom building, and a picnic table that leaned sideways. The map called it a stop, but nobody used it anymore. It existed for the timetable, not for people. Dorian opened the doors out of habit, waited 10 seconds, then closed them again. That was when he saw the backpack in the aisle, sitting upright like someone had placed it carefully. It was a plain gray bag, not one he recognized from earlier. Dorian checked the mirrors, then looked at his passenger count sheet. The bus was empty. And it had been empty since the last drop-off by the mill gate. He remembered the last rider getting off, because the kid thanked him twice. Dorian walked back and touched the backpack with 2 fingers, like it might be hot. It was heavier than it looked, and something inside clinked softly. He set it on the front seat, then keyed the radio. He told dispatch there was a lost bag and asked if anyone had called in. Dispatch said nobody had reported anything yet and told him to bring it to the depot. He should have just turned around, but he noticed a smell when he lifted it again. It was sharp, like pool cleaner, mixed with something sweet and wrong. Dorian hesitated, then unzipped the top a few inches. Inside was a plastic bottle with a rag stuffed into the neck and a second bottle taped to it. There were also matchbooks and a folded paper with a hand-drawn diagram. Dorian zipped it shut fast, and his throat went dry. He backed away and stared at the bag like it could move. He keyed the radio again, and this time his voice came out thin. He told dispatch the bag looked dangerous, and he needed instructions right now. Dispatch asked what kind of dangerous, and Dorian said he did not want to describe it over an open channel. Dispatch told him to pull off the route and wait for law enforcement. Dorian said there was nowhere safe to pull off, and the rest area was closed. Dispatch told him to stay put, doors locked, and keep the radio open. Dorian did what he was told and tried not to look at the backpack. He turned off the engine to save fuel, then turned it back on because the quiet made his ears ring. Fog rolled between the trees, and the rest area sign creaked in the wind. He watched the road in the mirror, expecting headlights, but the road stayed empty. After 10 minutes, the radio crackled, then went dead for a moment. Dorian thought he heard someone breathing on the line, then a click, then silence again. He pressed the talk button and asked dispatch to confirm. Dispatch answered, but the reply sounded delayed, like the words were coming through water. A car appeared from the trees, not on the road, but in the gravel lot behind the closed bathrooms. Dorian had not heard it arrive. It was an older sedan with no front plate, and its paint looked dull, almost dusty. A person stepped out, hood up, hands in pockets, walking slow toward the bus. Dorian locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. He picked up the radio mic and told dispatch someone was approaching the bus from the rear lot. Dispatch told him to stay inside and asked for a description. Dorian said the person looked average height, bulky jacket, face not visible. The person kept coming, and Dorian felt his heartbeat in his fingertips. The person reached the side of the bus and knocked once, then twice, polite and steady. Dorian did not answer, and the person knocked again, then pressed their forehead to the glass. Dorian could not see eyes under the hood, only a shadow and the outline of a nose. The person pointed at the backpack on the front seat, then made a slow, twisting motion with their hand, like turning a key. Dorian shook his head hard, then mouthed no, and backed away. The person tapped the glass and pointed again, more urgent. Then they stepped away, walked to the front of the bus, and crouched near the wheel well. Dorian lost sight of them, and panic spread through him like heat. He told dispatch the person was at the front of the bus, and then the engine coughed. The dashboard lights flickered, and the bus shuddered as if someone had tugged a cable. Dorian reached for the door switch to force the doors open, thinking he might run, but the switch did nothing. He tried the emergency lever, and it stuck halfway. The bus horn blared once without his hands on it, loud and sudden, then went quiet. Dorian heard a metallic scrape under the floor, near the front axle. He grabbed the fire extinguisher and held it like a bat. He kept his eyes on the windshield, waiting for the hooded person to reappear. Instead, he saw the sedan roll slowly into view, now on the road, moving away. The hooded person was behind the wheel, and the car picked up speed as it disappeared into fog. The bus sat there, trembling, and Dorian realized the backpack was still on the seat. He also realized dispatch had stopped talking. He pressed the mic and shouted, asking if anyone was on the line. The radio gave only a hiss, then a broken fragment of speech, like a recording clipped mid-sentence. Dorian sat down hard and tried to breathe through his nose. He stared at the backpack and wondered if the person had tried to disable the bus to get it back. A state trooper arrived almost 40 minutes later, lights flashing through the fog. Another unit came behind, and then a county deputy. Dorian watched them approach with caution, hands visible, weapons low, but ready. They ordered him out, moved him away from the bus, and asked him to sit on the asphalt with his hands on his knees. His legs shook so badly he could not stand straight. The trooper entered the bus with gloves on and carried the backpack out like it was alive. The deputy asked Dorian to repeat everything, and Dorian did, word by word. He told them about the smell, the diagram, the hooded person, the strange radio delay. He told them he had not touched anything after the first unzip. The deputy nodded, but his eyes stayed flat. They shut the road down for hours and brought in a specialist from another county. Dorian saw them place the backpack in a thick container and load it into a truck. They never told him exactly what it was, only that he did the right thing. The rest area stayed closed, and his route was canceled for the day. Dorian went home and sat in his kitchen until dawn, still hearing the knock in his head. He returned to work 2 days later, then quit before the month ended. He told people he could not handle the mountain roads anymore, and that was mostly true. He found a job as a freight dispatcher, where the worst thing that happened was a missed pickup. The bus company replaced him, and the route kept running, but Dorian avoided that highway like it was cursed. Time did what it always does, and the story turned into a rumor. Some people claimed it was a bomb. Others said it was drugs. Others said it was nothing. Dorian never corrected anyone because he did not have proof, only memory. He tried to file an information request once, but the response came back thin and redacted. After a while, he stopped trying. In the summer of 2023, Dorian got a letter with the county seal on it. It was brief and careful, inviting him to speak with an investigator about the old incident. The name on the letter was not a detective name, but an analyst, someone who worked cold files and archived records. Dorian almost threw it away, but curiosity won. The meeting took place in a plain office behind the courthouse with bad carpet and fluorescent lights. The analyst was a woman in her 50s named MrBallen. She had wireframe glasses and a calm voice that never rose. She did not act like someone chasing headlines, more like someone cleaning up an old mess. Maris asked Dorian to tell the story again, and he did. She listened without interrupting, writing notes in neat block letters. When he finished, she nodded once and slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of dispatch logs, a grainy still frame from a bus camera, and a map printout with circles drawn in pen. Dorian looked at the still frame first, and his stomach tightened. It showed the hooded person by the glass, head tilted, finger pointing toward the front seat. The camera timestamp read 11:37, and the image was clearer than Dorian expected. The person wore gloves, and the hood shadowed the face, but the shape of the jacket was distinct. Dorian recognized the bulk at the shoulders, like thick padding. Maris tapped the dispatch logs with her finger and said the radio delay was real. The audio had been recorded at the dispatch center, and the waveform showed dropouts. The recording also contained an odd segment, a brief voice that was not dispatch. It sounded like a man, speaking low, saying, "Turn the key and come back." Dorian felt his skin prickle because that was the exact gesture the hooded person made. He asked Maris who said it, and she said they did not know. The channel was supposed to be secure, but on that stretch, it could be reached by a strong enough handheld. Maris said the voice might have been close to the bus, using the terrain to push signal. Maris then showed him the map and asked if he had ever looked behind the rest area bathrooms. Dorian said he saw the sedan back there and nothing else. Maris said deputies searched the area that day, but their search was limited by fog and time. She said a new search had been done recently, after a forestry crew found something odd during brush clearing. Dorian asked what they found, and Maris paused before answering. She said they found a shallow cache, wrapped in tarp, buried under old gravel. Inside were several items, including bus schedules, matchbooks, and a set of gloves with rubberized palms. There was also a small notebook with a hand-drawn diagram that matched Dorian's description. Dorian swallowed and asked why this was coming up now. Maris said the notebook included dates and route numbers that continued beyond the day Dorian stopped driving. It looked like planning for later attempts that never happened. Maris said the person might have been practicing or waiting for a better opportunity. The sudden stop may have forced them to abandon the cache. Dorian asked if they ever identified the person, and Maris said they had a lead, but it was incomplete. She said a traffic camera on the highway caught the sedan later that day, but the plate was unreadable. However, a repair shop invoice had surfaced years later, connected to a similar car with a cracked headlight. The customer used cash and a false name, but the shop kept a copy of a handwritten note. Maris slid another photocopy across the table. It was a short note, written in sloppy print, asking for a quick fix and a return pickup at the old rest area. At the bottom was a signature that looked like two initials, then a last name. Dorian stared at it and felt a strange jolt of recognition, like seeing a face in a crowd. He told Maris the last name matched the mill gate where he dropped off the last rider that morning. The mill had a security desk, and Dorian remembered the guard's name tag because it was unusual. The name on the note was the same. Dorian's mouth went dry as he said it out loud. Maris nodded, like she had been waiting for that connection. She said the old mill had kept shift rosters, and one guard with that last name had worked there briefly. The guard left after a complaint about erratic behavior and missing tools. The guard also lived near the bus route in a rural rental with a shed. Years later, the guard died in an accident, and the property was sold. Dorian asked if they searched the shed, and Maris said they did, after getting permission from the new owner. She said they found nothing dramatic, but they did find a box of old transit tokens and a handheld radio with a modified antenna. They also found a jacket with padded shoulders, and the fabric matched the camera still. Maris said it was not enough for a case, but it was enough to answer questions. Dorian sat back and tried to process it, because the fear had never had a shape before. He asked why the person wanted the backpack back so badly. Maris said the evidence suggested it was not meant to be used on the bus itself. It was meant to be carried off at a later stop, possibly handed to someone else. The rest area was a meeting point, not a target. Maris said the diagram showed fuel storage locations, not inside the bus, but near a maintenance yard. It looked like sabotage planning aimed at equipment, not people. That mattered, but it did not make Dorian feel better. Dorian said the person still tried to trap him, and Maris agreed. She said the person likely panicked when the bag was discovered early and tried to recover it at any cost. Dorian asked about the strange moment with the horn and the door switch. Maris said technicians inspected the bus afterward and found the battery cable had been pulled loose. She said it could have been vibration, but it was unlikely. The scrape Dorian heard matched the position where someone could reach under and yank it. The horn could have triggered as voltage dropped, like a dying gasp. Dorian's hands started shaking again, and he clasped them tightly. He asked why the person drove away instead of fighting harder. Maris said the arriving patrol units were seen by the sedan driver before they reached the rest area. A watcher could have been posted down the road, or the driver could have heard sirens echo. The safest choice was to flee and leave the cash for later. Dorian stared at the bus camera still again and noticed something he never saw before. The hooded person's glove had a tear at the thumb, and a strip of pale skin showed. Dorian remembered that the mill guard with the unusual name had a bandage on his thumb once, back when Dorian still drove that route. Dorian could not be sure it was the same person, but the memory hit like cold water. Maris asked Dorian why he came back to this now, after so many years. Dorian said he did not choose it, the letter did. Maris said he did choose it because he walked into the office. Dorian looked at her and gave a small, tired smile. He told Maris the truth, which was that the unfinished part had followed him for years. It was not the backpack, or the fog, or even the knock. It was the moment the radio seemed to breathe, like someone was already inside the line. He said it made him feel watched in a way he could not explain. Maris said sometimes the mind saves the sharpest details, because they matter. Before Dorian left, Maris asked if he wanted to see the rest area again. Dorian surprised himself by saying yes, but not alone. 2 days later, Maris and a deputy met him at the old turnout in clear weather. The bathrooms were still boarded, and weeds pushed through the asphalt cracks. The place looked smaller than it did in memory. They walked behind the building where the sedan had been, and the deputy pointed to a patch of disturbed gravel. Dorian saw the shallow pit where the cache had been, now filled in again. He looked at the trees and listened to the wind, waiting for a knock that did not come. In daylight, it felt like any abandoned place, lonely and ordinary. Maris showed him the exact spot where the bus had parked, marked by a faded paint line. She asked him to stand there and look at the road, and Dorian did. He imagined the hooded figure, the radio hiss, the dead channel. He imagined the moment he chose to unzip the bag, and the moment he chose to zip it back up. Dorian realized that small choices were the whole story. If he had ignored the bag, it might have been carried off later. If he had opened it fully, something could have spilled or sparked. If he had opened the doors to speak with the hooded person, the person might have gotten inside. The route could have ended in a different kind of silence. The deputy told Dorian they were closing the old file as far as they could. They had a likely suspect, but no living person to charge, and no clear proof of an intended crime. The evidence would be preserved, and the maintenance yards had new security measures now. Dorian nodded, because that was as close to an ending as reality often gave. On the drive back, Dorian watched the trees slide past and felt his shoulders relax for the first time in years. The fear did not vanish, but it shrank into something he could carry without dropping everything else. He had come back, and the place did not swallow him. He had faced the last stop, and it stayed quiet. That night, Dorian slept with the window cracked, and the cold air felt clean. He still dreamed of the knock sometimes, but now the dream had edges. It was no longer a faceless force in fog, it was a person making desperate choices. Dorian did not forgive that person, but he finally understood the shape of it. The next morning, Dorian drove to work in his own car and merged onto the highway without flinching. He watched a city bus pull into a stop and open its doors, ordinary and loud. For a moment, he imagined the driver inside, doing the job, trusting the schedule, trusting the radio. Dorian hoped that driver never had to turn back years later, just to learn why. The stories. Why this small bridge kept people silent. The county kept records, yet this small bridge kept people silent for years after the last official report. When strangers asked about it, locals changed the subject fast, then acted like the question never happened. In late autumn of 2011, Marlo Kincaid drove out before sunrise with a thermos and a clipboard. Marlo was 36 and worked as a road maintenance inspector for the county transportation office. That morning, the job was simple. Check a minor bridge on a rural access road. A logging company wanted heavier trucks cleared for the season, and paperwork needed a clean inspection. The bridge sat in a shallow valley between scrub pines and old pasture, barely wide enough for two cars. It was the kind of span nobody photographed: stained concrete, low rails, and water trickling under stones. County maps called it a numbered structure, but locals called it Hush Bridge, like it was a joke. Marlowe had heard the nickname once in the office, and nobody explained it beyond a shrug. He parked on the shoulder and walked the length, boots scraping grit and dried leaves. The air smelled like wet bark, and the creek made a soft, steady sound under the deck. Marlowe took photos of hairline cracks and measured the rail height, then checked for fresh impact marks. Everything looked ordinary until he noticed the chalky streaks on the concrete near the center. The streaks were pale, like someone dragged a bag of powder across the deck and tried to rinse it. Marlowe crouched and ran a glove over it, then looked at his fingertips in the dim light. It was gritty, not mud, and it did not match road dust from the gravel shoulders. A faint chemical smell hung there, sharp enough that Marlowe stood up and breathed through his mouth. He stepped to the rail and looked down at the creek, expecting to see a dumped bag or broken container. The water was clear, and the stones looked clean, except for a dark patch beneath the bridge shadow. It was not oil, and it did not spread like fuel, yet it clung to the rocks. Marlowe snapped more photos, then wrote a note to call environmental services after he finished the inspection. A pickup rolled up behind him and idled. Then a man leaned out with both hands on the wheel. The man was older, heavy jacket, cap pulled low, and his face stayed half hidden. "You should do your paperwork quick," the man said, voice flat and careful. Marlowe nodded and gave the friendly answer he used with everyone on rural calls. "Just doing my job," Marlowe said, then tried to smile like the day was normal. The man did not smile back, and his eyes kept flicking to the center of the bridge. "People don't like talking here," the man said, then cleared his throat like he regretted speaking. Marlowe waited for more, but the man tapped the wheel once and stared straight ahead. After a long moment, the pickup backed up and turned around, tires crunching, then disappeared up the road. Marlowe finished the last measurements and walked back to his car, feeling watched from the trees. He called his supervisor, then mentioned the odd residue and the dark patch in the creek. The supervisor sounded tired and told him to file it, then send the photos to the shared drive. Marlowe also called the environmental hotline, and the dispatcher took notes without much reaction. On the drive back, Marlowe stopped at a small diner near the highway to grab a second coffee. The place was quiet, with two locals at the counter and a radio playing low behind the kitchen door. Marlowe asked the server, casual as he could, why folks called that bridge Hush Bridge. The server froze for half a second, then poured coffee like the question was about the weather. "Just an old nickname," she said, then looked away and added, "Better not chase it." Marlowe did not push, but the two locals heard, and the air changed in a way he could feel. One man stared at his plate, and the other cleared his throat and stood up too fast. Nobody said another word until Marlowe paid and left, and even then the bell over the door sounded loud. By the time he reached the parking lot, the feeling of being watched was back, only now in plain daylight. That evening, Marlowe uploaded the photos and wrote a clean report, yet he kept thinking about the powder. He zoomed in on the images at home, and the streaks looked like footprints that had been smeared. There were marks near the rail, then a long drag line toward the center of the deck. Marlowe told himself it was nothing, maybe spilled lime from a farm trailer, yet the smell bothered him. 2 days later, a county email came through saying the environmental call was closed as non-actionable. No site visit was scheduled, and the message included a short note, "No hazard observed from roadway." Marlowe read it twice and felt his jaw tighten because he had been on the roadway. He forwarded the email to his supervisor with a short question and got no reply. The next week, Marlowe went back on his own time, telling himself he needed better photos. He took a personal camera and a small flashlight, and arrived in late afternoon when shadows stretched long. The bridge looked the same, but the chalky streaks were gone, as if someone scrubbed them hard. Under the rail, a new bolt gleamed bright, and the rail itself had fresh scratches. Marlowe leaned over and saw the dark patch in the creek was gone too, replaced by clean stone. He followed the bank a short distance, then found a section where grass was flattened in a wide strip. There were tire prints that did not match county vehicles, and they angled down toward the water. Marlowe took photos, then walked back to the bridge with his stomach tight and his mouth dry. At the center of the deck, he noticed a thin line across the concrete, almost invisible in the fading light. It looked like a cut line from a saw, shallow but straight, running from rail to rail. Marlowe knelt and traced it with a fingertip, then pulled back when he felt a sharp edge. Someone had scored the deck surface, then patched it with a filler that almost matched the original. He heard a vehicle approach and stood quickly, stuffing his camera into his jacket. A county-marked SUV rolled up, and a uniformed deputy stepped out, hand resting near his belt. The deputy was a woman in her 40s, and her face carried that calm look of practiced control. "Evening," she said, then nodded toward the bridge like it belonged to her. "County business?" she asked, voice polite, but the question landed like a warning. Marlowe told the truth, sort of, and said he was following up on an earlier inspection. The deputy looked at him for a long beat, then walked to the rail and looked down. When she spoke again, her voice dropped lower, and she did not face him. "Folks around here don't need outsiders stirring things up," she said, still calm. Marlowe swallowed and tried to keep his tone steady, because his badge card was in his wallet. "I'm not stirring anything," Marlowe said. "I just need the bridge to be safe." The deputy turned back and studied him, then took out a small notepad and wrote something. "Keep your report in the system," she said, "and don't come back alone." Marlowe asked if there had been incidents here, and the deputy's eyes tightened for a second. "No official incidents," she said, then added, "Official is a careful word." She got back in the SUV and drove off slow, leaving Marlowe with the creak noise and his own breathing. That night, Marlowe searched the county archive portal from his laptop, using keywords and old structure numbers. He found a maintenance entry from 1998 that mentioned minor deck repair after an impact. The note was short and bland, yet it included a line about temporary closure for investigation support. Investigation support was not a road term, and it stuck out like a wrong part in an engine. Marlowe clicked for the attached report, but the attachment was missing, listed as migrated with errors. He tried another angle and searched local newspaper scans, which the library kept on a clunky site. A small article from 2003 mentioned a missing person case that ended with no charges filed. The article referenced a creek crossing on a rural access road, but did not name it. It included a quote from a sheriff spokesperson asking the public not to speculate. Marlowe noticed the public comment section was blank, as if it had been wiped or never allowed. The next day, Marlowe drove to the county records room during lunch, acting like he needed old bridge plans. The clerk on duty was a man named Sutter, round glasses, neat hair, and a careful, polite smile. Marlowe asked for the 1998 file tied to the structure number and watched Sutter's hands pause. Sutter typed slowly, then frowned at the screen like it offended him, and leaned closer to read. "That file isn't in public retrieval," Sutter said, then cleared his throat and looked away. Marlowe asked why, and Sutter lowered his voice until it was almost a whisper. "Some things got sealed after a meeting," Sutter said, "and nobody wants their name in it." Marlowe walked out feeling hot in the face, as if he had done something wrong by asking. He sat in his car and listened to the engine idle, then opened his phone and reviewed his bridge photos. The drag marks near the rail, the scored line, the fresh bolt, it all felt connected now. He decided to call someone who might speak without the county walls around them. A retired tow operator named Vance Aller lived on the edge of town and still fixed small engines for cash. Marlowe had met him once during a winter closure and remembered that Vance talked straight. Marlowe drove out after work and found Vance in a shed, hands black with grease and eyes sharp. Vance listened without interrupting, then sat back on a stool and rubbed his jaw. "That bridge eats noise," Vance said, then looked toward the open door like someone might be listening. Marlowe asked what that meant, and Vance exhaled slow through his nose. "Years ago," Vance said, "people used the bridge as a shortcut for hauling, and sometimes for things they did not log. There were nights when a car would idle on the span, lights off, then a splash would follow. Nobody saw a body, and nobody found one. Yet the creek carried scraps and odd stains after storms. Dispatch logs reportedly showed calls about screams, then callers hanging up when asked for their name. Vance said deputies drove out, walked the deck, then told everyone it was kids messing around. Marlowe asked why people stayed quiet, and Vance's face went still, like a door closing. "Because the ones who asked too much got visits," Vance said, voice low and plain. He said a local businessman had friends in the right rooms, and he did favors for the county. When the bridge needed repairs, his company offered materials cheap, and everyone said thank you. Marlowe asked for a name, and Vance shook his head once, firm and final. Don't do that, Vance said. Names make it real, and real gets you hurt. Marlowe went home and sat at his kitchen table, staring at his notes until the paper blurred. He did not believe in ghost stories, and this did not feel like one anyway. It felt like people with power had used a forgotten spot to solve problems quietly. He decided to focus on what he could prove and to avoid guessing about who. On a Saturday morning, Marlowe returned to the bridge with a coworker, a younger inspector named Lita Rohn. Lita was 29, sharp and fearless in a way that made older men nervous. Marlowe told her only that something about the deck patch looked unsafe, and he needed a second set of eyes. They parked on opposite shoulders to avoid blocking the road, then walked the span together in silence. Lita knelt at the scored line and tapped the concrete with a small hammer, listening to the tone. Most of the deck rang solid, but near the line, the sound turned hollow, like a thin lid over air. She frowned and tapped again, then stood and looked at Marlowe with a hard, practical expression. This is a patch over a cutout, she said, keeping her voice level. If a truck hits this wrong, it could pop, she said, then pointed to the rail scratches. Something heavy got hauled over here, and it wasn't standard work. They photographed everything and marked the spot with a small removable tag, then left without lingering. That afternoon, Marlowe filed a safety escalation, using Lita's measurements and the hollow tone notes. The county system accepted the report, but within hours, the status changed to under review, then locked. Marlowe tried to open it again and got an error message about permissions. Lita called him, voice tight, and said her supervisor told her to stop talking about that bridge. Marlowe felt anger flare, then settle into something colder and more focused. He printed his photos and notes at home, then made a second copy on a small drive. He also wrote a timeline, keeping it clean, dates, what he saw, who he spoke to. He avoided names and stuck to actions, because actions were harder to argue with. Then he drove to the library and asked for the old dispatch logs in the local history room. The librarian on duty was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a gentle voice named Corbin Meza. Corbin listened and did not flinch, but he did glance toward the front desk now and then. He said some dispatch logs were public after a waiting period, unless flagged for legal reasons. Corbin pulled a box of microfilm and showed Marlowe how to use the reader without drawing attention. Marlowe scrolled through dates from 2003, then 2005, looking for creek crossing calls. He found a pattern that made his throat go tight, calls logged near midnight on weekends, always short. One entry mentioned shouting and a splash, and another mentioned a vehicle idling on the bridge with lights off. Several had the same note, caller refused to identify. Then call terminated. A few had a follow-up. Unit responded, no findings, area secure. Marlowe printed the entries and thanked Corbin, who only nodded and said, be careful with paper. On the way out, Marlowe noticed a woman standing near the magazine rack watching him too closely. She held a phone at chest height, screen angled like she was reading, yet her eyes tracked his hands. Marlowe kept walking and did not look back, but his skin prickled all the way to the parking lot. At home, he checked his truck for a tag or device and found nothing, yet the feeling stayed. That night, he got a call from an unknown number, and nobody spoke when he answered. The next week, a work order appeared in the county system for the bridge, scheduled for immediate resurfacing. Marlowe had not been asked for input, and the contractor listed was a private firm from 2 counties over. He drove out after hours and saw fresh cones and a portable light tower parked near the shoulder. 2 men in reflective jackets stood by a truck, but their uniforms were blank, no company name. Marlowe stayed in his car and watched from a distance, heart beating hard against his ribs. One of the men walked the deck and scraped at the scored line with a tool, then nodded. Another opened the back of the truck and pulled out something long wrapped in plastic, about the length of a person. They slid it across the deck toward the center, then disappeared under the bridge through the bank brush. Marlowe raised his phone and recorded through the windshield, keeping the screen dim. The video was shaky, yet it caught the moment the plastic dragged across the concrete and left a pale streak. Marlowe drove away before anyone looked up. and his hands shook on the steering wheel. At home, he watched the video frame by frame and saw the streak match his first photos. He could not tell what was inside the plastic, but the shape was wrong for tools or lumber. He also noticed something else. A third vehicle in the background, lights off, parked farther up the road. It was a county-marked SUV, and it sat there like a quiet promise. Marlowe did not take the video to his supervisor because that path was already closed. He took it to the state-level transportation safety office using a general intake line and a mailed packet. He included only the structural concern, the hollow tone test, the evidence of unauthorized deck alteration. He also included the dispatch log prints and wrote that local access appeared compromised. He did not accuse anyone, and he did not write theories, yet he knew what the packet implied. 2 months later, a state inspection team arrived without much notice, and the bridge was closed for a full day. They drilled test cores and scanned the deck with ground-penetrating equipment, then marked several spots in paint. A week after that, the county announced the bridge would be replaced due to unexpected internal deterioration. No mention was made of patches or cut lines, and no mention was made of why the deck had been altered. Locals accepted the announcement with the same quiet faces Marlowe had seen in the diner. During demolition in early spring of 2012, a worker reportedly found a sealed cavity inside the deck. The official statement said it contained debris and old construction waste, nothing hazardous to the public. Yet a separate rumor traveled faster than official statements ever did, and it never appeared in print. The rumor said the cavity held items that were bagged and removed under supervision before sunrise. Marlowe heard that from Vance, who said a friend on the crew stopped answering calls afterward. When the new bridge opened, it looked cleaner and safer. Higher rails, better drainage, fresh concrete. The nickname did not die, though, because nicknames survive facts and outlast signage. People still called it Hush Bridge, and they still got quiet when anyone asked why. Marlowe noticed something else. The creek bed under the new span was lined with rock like a neat blanket. It was the kind of work done to prevent erosion, or to bury what the water once revealed. Marlowe stayed with the county, and he never spoke publicly about his packet or his video. He did get one strange thing, a letter with no return address, postmarked from a city far away. Inside was a single photocopy of his 1998 archive search screen with one line highlighted. The line read, "Investigation support," and someone had written 2 words in pen beneath it. "Stop digging," it said, letters uneven like a hand that shook. He kept the letter anyway, folded in a plain envelope inside a locked drawer. Sometimes, on long drives for routine inspections, Marlowe took the older access road without thinking. He would slow near the new bridge and feel his throat tighten. Then he would keep going. Nothing jumped out, and no one chased him, because real life rarely gives clean endings. What stayed was the quiet, the practiced silence of people protecting themselves by saying nothing. Years later, Marlowe told Lita what he had found, but only after she moved out of the county. She listened, then said she always wondered why her report got locked so fast. Marlowe did not answer with a speech, because speeches do not fit a place like that. He only said the bridge was rebuilt, and the creek ran clear again, and still nobody talked. Some places do not need signs to warn people, because everyone already learned the rules. The stories. These archived dispatch calls revealed proof. The audio sat in a plain folder, stamped with a date and a case number that never went anywhere. Years later, those archived dispatch calls finally showed what actually happened that night. Blaine Hargrove was 42, and he produced local radio stories for a small station in the Desert West. On a Monday morning in early spring, he drove to the county building to request old emergency recordings. He had a simple goal for the day. He wanted sound for a cautious piece about misfiled crash reports. The station had heard whispers for years. One incident near a highway turnout kept returning in complaints. The rumor was always the same: a late-night call, a single vehicle, then a sudden silence. Some locals said a teenager vanished. Others said the report was padded to hide a police mistake. Blaine never repeated those claims on air. He only said the file had gaps and missing pages. Dispatch archives were supposed to be routine, so he expected a quick copy and a polite goodbye. At the counter, a clerk named Lark Soria slid a form under the glass and kept her voice low. She looked about 30, and she worked records intake for public requests and internal routing. She told Blaine the recordings existed, but the index notes were strange and partly overwritten. Blaine asked what that meant, and she shrugged, like she did not want the answer either. Lark led him to a side desk with an old computer and a small speaker that crackled at low volume. She said the county had migrated systems twice, and some files survived only as stitched fragments. Blaine thanked her, then put on headphones and began listening with a producer's careful patience. The first minutes sounded normal, a dispatcher logging traffic stops and a stalled truck call. Then the incident started, with a man's voice cutting in, tense, short, and trying to stay calm. He said he was at a turnout by the mile marker sign and something was wrong with a parked car. The dispatcher asked for details, and the caller said the driver was slumped and not responding. Blaine expected the next line, send units, start medical, confirm location, but the recording shifted. A second dispatcher voice appeared, sharper, and it used a call sign Blaine did not recognize. It ordered a unit to break off, then told another unit to hold traffic and wait for a supervisor. The first dispatcher tried to speak, but the audio clipped like someone keyed a mic too close. Blaine rewound and listened again, and the same odd command landed in the same exact second. He paused the audio and stared at the screen, because it sounded like two channels merged poorly. Lark watched him from behind the counter, and her face tightened when she saw his expression. Blaine asked if the second dispatcher was real or if the system had a known echo problem. Lark said there should have been only one dispatcher on nights, and the roster showed a single name. Blaine kept listening, and the caller's voice returned, quieter now, as if he had moved closer. He said the car door was open, and there was a phone on the seat with the screen still lit. The dispatcher told him to step back, and he agreed, but his breathing stayed loud in the mic. Then a new sound came through, a brief metallic click, followed by a calm voice saying, cancel units. The cancel order did not sound like a field officer. It sounded like a desk voice with a practiced rhythm. Blaine felt his skin go cold because cancellations were supposed to include a reason and a unit number. Instead, the voice simply said the call was unfounded and told everyone to return to prior assignments. The original dispatcher protested, and the recording ended with a sharp tone and a cut to dead air. Blaine removed the headphones and asked Lark if the logbook matched what he had just heard. She opened a scanned report on her screen, and it showed a routine welfare check with no transport. The notes said the vehicle belonged to an out-of-town contractor, and it drove off before contact. Blaine asked if any unit ever arrived, and Lark said the unit number was blank in the entry. He requested the original dispatch log, and Lark told him those paper logs were stored off-site in boxes. She offered to file another request, and Blaine agreed, keeping his voice steady and professional. As he signed the form, he noticed her hands were trembling, like she had heard this story too. Lark said she could not access everything, but she could tell him where the boxes were indexed. That afternoon, Blaine returned to his station office and transferred the audio into editing software. He did not change the file, he only made a working copy and marked the timestamps carefully. He listened in full, then compared it to the written entry line by line, looking for simple explanations. A bad merge could explain overlap, but it could not explain the new dispatcher voice using a missing call sign. Blaine called a retired dispatcher he knew, a man named Hollis Gant, who taught radio basics at a community college. Hollis was 61, and he had worked nights for 2 decades before taking early retirement. Blaine played a short excerpt, and Hollis immediately asked where the second voice came from. He said it sounded like a console mic, not a portable radio, because of the clean compression and lack of wind noise. Blaine asked about the click, and Hollis said it sounded like a channel patch being opened and closed. He explained that old systems let supervisors override traffic, especially during officer safety incidents. Blaine asked if overrides were logged, and Hollis said they should be, unless someone bypassed the normal menu. He also said the voice cadence felt familiar, like someone who had trained others and used set phrases. Blaine made a plan that was simple: gather every source that could confirm who spoke and who listened. He requested the off-site paper logs, the unit assignment roster, and the maintenance notes for the dispatch console. He also tracked down the original caller, using the case number tied to the partial record index. The contact address was outdated, but a utility record pointed to a forwarding box in a coastal town. A week later, Blaine reached the caller by phone, and the man sounded older than expected. His name was Keir Lamb. He was 50, and he worked as a forklift mechanic for a shipping yard. Keir said he had avoided interviews for years because he felt stupid and scared about that night. He agreed to talk off the record first, as long as Blaine did not use his name on air. Keir said he had been driving home late, and he pulled into the turnout to make a quick call. He noticed a sedan with its driver door open and a person inside who did not respond. He called emergency services from a flip phone, and he remembered the dispatcher voice clearly. He also remembered someone else talking over her, like a second person in the same room. Keir said he heard the cancel order, and it did not come through the phone speaker. He said it came from behind him, like someone standing near the turnout speaking into a handheld radio. Blaine asked if Keir saw anyone, and Keir said he saw a dark SUV with no light bar. It rolled in slow, stopped without headlights, and someone stepped out and told him to leave. Keir said the person was not in uniform, but he held a radio and spoke like he belonged there. He told Keir, "Go home. You didn't see anything, and you don't want trouble." Keir left because he believed him, and because his phone screen had gone dark as if the call dropped. He drove straight home, and he did not sleep, because he kept imagining the open car door in the wind. Blaine asked why Keir never filed a complaint, and Keir said he tried once, then got warned again. He said a man called his house the next day and knew details that were not in the public record. The man told him the county had it handled and said his job could get complicated if he kept talking. Keir said he had a kid at home then, and he chose silence, even though it still bothered him. Blaine compared Keir's memory to the audio again, and one detail stood out in a new way. The cancel voice sounded like it came through the dispatch system, but Keir remembered hearing it nearby. That meant someone on scene repeated the cancel order, or someone on scene caused it to happen. Blaine needed more than a feeling. He needed a solid chain from the console to the turnout. When the off-site boxes arrived, Lark called Blaine and told him to come in after lunch. She met him with a cart of binders and a warning. The pages smelled like smoke and old tape. Blaine thanked her, then began photographing entries with his phone, keeping the dates aligned. The log for that night included the initial call, but the next lines were torn out cleanly. The tier was too neat for age, like someone removed a strip on purpose and then filed the rest. Blaine asked Lark who handled archives back then, and she said a supervisor managed retention compliance. She gave Blaine a name that was public in old payroll records, a dispatch supervisor known for strict control. Blaine did not repeat the name in his notes. He wrote only supervisor and the year. Blaine requested the maintenance notes next, hoping they would show a console override or a repair ticket. The county replied with a short letter saying no relevant notes existed due to a purge policy. Blaine appealed the response and included dates and system model references from public purchasing records. 2 days later, a different clerk emailed a scan that had been missed, a single page with a service code. The page referenced a patch panel fault, and it listed a time within minutes of the turnout call. It also listed a technician sign-off, and the signature matched the supervisor's initials in the payroll files. Blaine showed the page to Hollis, and Hollis frowned and said that was not a technician's signature. He said it looked like a supervisor signing to close a ticket without an actual repair. Blaine now had 3 things that aligned: an overwritten index, torn log lines, and an odd console patch record. Still, none of it proved who issued the cancel order, and none of it proved why. He needed the one thing most people ignored: the background noise that rides under speech. So he took the working copy and asked an audio engineer at the station to run a clean analysis. The engineer, a woman named Tamsin Rowe, was 35 and had built her career restoring old interview tape. She listened with good headphones, then zoomed into the waveform around the metallic click. She said there was a second click under the first, offset by a fraction of a second. She explained it sounded like a desk foot switch, followed by a handheld transmit button. Tamsin also noticed something stranger: a low tone under the cancel voice that stayed constant. She said it sounded like an air conditioner fan, the kind found in small office rooms. Then, she compared it to the first dispatcher voice, and the fan tone was different and steadier. That suggested the cancel voice was recorded in a different room, then patched into the main channel. Blaine asked if that could happen, and Tamsin said yes, if someone used a training room console. Some centers had a second console for drills, and it could be patched into live traffic in emergencies. Blaine asked who had access, and Tamsin said supervisors and trainers usually had the keys. Blaine felt the story tightening because a trainer would know exactly how to sound calm on a bad night. He returned to the county building and asked Lark one careful question. Did the dispatch center have a training console then? Lark hesitated, then said the old floor plan showed a side room labeled instruction booth. She said it was removed during renovations, but it existed in that era and shared wiring with the main floor. Blaine asked if the booth had its own mic, and she said yes, and it had a direct patch switch. Blaine still did not have the motive, and he did not want to guess at it. So he looked at what else happened that night, and he found something buried in unrelated paperwork. A property sheet showed a large cash seizure from a traffic stop logged into the evidence room at midnight. The next morning, the cash was reported short, and the report blamed a counting error and got closed. Blaine lined up the times, and the turnout call landed right between the evidence log and the cash discrepancy report. He asked Hollis if a fake emergency could pull units off the road, and Hollis said it was a classic trick. A welfare check at a turnout would draw patrol, and it would also distract dispatch from monitoring internal doors. If someone needed 5 minutes alone, a sudden call and a sudden cancel could make that window. Blaine called Keir again and asked about the dark SUV, and Keir described it in more detail. He said it had a State Fleet plate and a small antenna cluster like a communications vehicle. He said the driver who spoke to him wore a plain jacket, but carried himself like a supervisor. Keir also said the sedan in the turnout was not in bad shape. It looked staged, like it had been parked carefully. Blaine realized the proof was not just in what the dispatch calls said, it was in what they avoided saying. No one ever confirmed a unit arrival, no one ever logged a plate check, and no one asked for medical priority. The call was designed to be started and stopped quickly, without the normal steps that create paper trails. That meant the person controlling it knew policy, and knew exactly which parts to skip. Blaine requested one more thing: the building entry logs for the dispatch center on that night. The county said those logs did not exist anymore, but a facilities contractor had kept backups for billing disputes. After more calls, Blaine obtained a scanned badge report that showed door activity after midnight. It showed the supervisor badge opening the training booth door, then the evidence room hallway door minutes later. Blaine sat with Tamsin and Hollis and listened to the key moments again, with the badge report in hand. They played the click, the cancel voice, and the sharp cut to dead air. Hollis said the cut sounded like a manual stop, not a system end, because the tail tone was missing. Tamsin said the handheld click matched a portable radio nearby, which fit Keir hearing a voice behind him. Blaine had to be careful, because proof can still be misunderstood if the story gets rushed. He wrote a timeline using only documents, audio artifacts, and witness statements that could be verified. He removed names, and he removed any detail that could point to private people who had done nothing wrong. He focused on the method: a staged call, a training booth patch, a rapid cancel, and a missing log strip. When Blaine returned to the county building to ask for comment, Lark met him with tired eyes. She said someone had called her office, asking why she kept helping a radio producer dig up old dirt. Blaine told her she did not need to do anything else, and he could handle the rest on his own. Lark shook her head and said she had one more thing, because she was done pretending it was normal. She handed him a photocopy of an internal memo, filed as a training note but written like a warning. It instructed staff to route certain audio requests to supervision, and it referenced the turnout call by date. The memo used the phrase proof risk, and it ordered that no copies be made outside official review. Lark said she found it in a misfiled binder, and it had never been scanned into the public index. Blaine read the memo twice, then folded it and placed it in a plain envelope with his notes. The proof was not a confession, but it was a paper trail showing someone feared what the audio contained. He thanked Lark, and she asked one question. "Are you going to put this out there?" Blaine said he would, but he would do it carefully and only with what he could support. The final piece came from a place Blaine did not expect: a voicemail from an old number he had called weeks earlier. It was short and strained, and it sounded like a person trying to choose words that would not invite retaliation. The voice said the training booth patch switch was used that night, and it was used by someone with keys. The voice also said the sedan at the turnout belonged to a county pool and it was checked out under a fake entry. Blaine saved the voicemail, then asked Tamsin to confirm it was not spliced or altered. Tamsin said it was clean, and she noted the same steady fan tone found under the cancel voice. That meant the voicemail speaker had likely been in the same small room and knew the sound of it. Blaine did not know who left the message, but the audio carried its own quiet fingerprint. When the story aired, Blaine kept the language careful and grounded because facts matter more than heat. He played the dispatch excerpt, then explained the torn log, the badge report, and the patch record. He included Keir's account without naming him, and he described the SUV in broad terms only. He never claimed a specific person stole anything, but he showed how the staged call created a perfect distraction. The county responded with a short statement, saying the matter was old and could not be confirmed. They did not deny the training booth existed, and they did not explain why the log strip was missing. Within days, a state auditor announced a review of evidence handling practices going back many years. Blaine did not celebrate, because the point was never drama. It was the shape of truth in the record. Weeks later, Blaine sat in his edit room and listened to the archived call one last time. He noticed how the original dispatcher sounded, like someone trying to do her job inside a sudden fog. He imagined the moment she realized a second voice had taken control, and she could not stop it. It was not supernatural. It was ordinary power, used quietly, and that made it worse. Blaine filed the raw audio, the memo copy, and his notes into the station archive with strict access rules. He labeled everything with dates in words, so future staff would not lose the trail in bad metadata. He also sent Keir a short message through the number he had, saying the story was finally out. Keir replied once, and only with relief, saying he could breathe easier now. The proof had been there all along, hiding in a click, a fan hum, and a missing strip of paper. It did not solve every question about the turnout, but it showed the call was never what it claimed. For Blaine, that was enough to matter, because it meant the record could still be corrected. And for anyone who still trusted the archive, it was a reminder that silence sometimes has fingerprints. The stories. What happened inside this roadside diner will shock you. The incident became a training story in 2 counties, because the footage looked ordinary until the last minute. It happened at a roadside diner off a long desert highway, and nobody agreed on what they saw. Dorian Kessler was 37 and worked as a commercial refrigeration tech for grocery stores and small restaurants. On a Tuesday in late spring, he drove east through high desert to replace a failing walk-in cooler motor. He had a work order, a parts box, and a plan to be home before dark. The diner was the only open place for miles, so he stopped for coffee first. The building was low and sunburned, with a buzzing sign and a gravel lot full of dust. Inside, the air smelled like fryer oil and lemon cleaner, and the booths stuck to the skin. A waitress named Maris Sloan was on shift, and she looked tired but alert. Maris was 42 and worked nights and mornings because the diner never fully closed. Dorian ordered black coffee and eggs, then checked his phone for the address again. Maris slid the plate down and asked what brought him out so far. He said he fixed coolers, and he was there to keep someone from losing a whole freezer. She nodded like she had heard that story 100 times, then glanced toward the kitchen door. A cook called something he could not make out, and Maris answered without turning around. Dorian noticed a small camcorder behind the register, aimed at the dining room. The diner did not feel dangerous, but it felt watched in a way he could not explain. A man in a windbreaker sat at the counter and kept his hands in his pockets. 2 truckers shared a booth, and they spoke low like they did not want attention. Dorian ate fast, then went to pay, because he wanted to start work before heat rose. As he stood at the register, the power flickered once, and the lights dimmed for a second. The buzzing sign outside changed pitch, like the voltage dipped and snapped back. Maris frowned and tapped the register screen, then the printer spit a blank slip. She sighed and said, "Not again. It did this yesterday, too." Dorian offered to look, because voltage drops were his whole life. Maris led him through the swinging door into the kitchen, and the noise got louder at once. Fans rattled in a vent hood, and an old freezer clicked like a bad relay. The cook was a broad man named Keenan Rourke, and he looked about 50. Keenan said the back hallway light had been pulsing, and the storage cooler was warm. Dorian opened his parts box, then crouched by the breaker panel near the dish area. He checked the main feed with a tester, and the numbers jumped more than they should. The panel cover was newer than the rest of the kitchen, and the screws looked recently handled. Dorian asked when the panel was replaced, and Keenan shrugged without looking at him. Maris said the owner did it after a break-in back in 2019. Dorian noticed her eyes stayed on the hallway that led to the back offices. The hallway was narrow and dark, with a mop bucket halfway blocking the path. A door at the end had a keypad, which felt strange for a place this small. Dorian pointed at it, and Maris said it was the office and storage for payroll. She said the owner did not like people back there, not even staff. Dorian nodded and went back to the panel, but he kept thinking about that keypad. He traced the flicker to a loose neutral and a corroded lug, which was simple and annoying. While he tightened the connection, a muffled thump came from the back hallway. Keenan paused with a pan in his hands, and Maris held her breath for a beat. Dorian asked if someone was in the office, and Maris said, "It is probably the ice maker." The thump came again, and this time it sounded closer, like it was against the hallway wall. Dorian stood and wiped his hands, then said he would check the ice machine anyway. Maris stepped in front of him, and her voice stayed flat as she said no. Keenan kept his eyes down, but his jaw tightened like he was chewing a secret. Dorian took a step back, because the tension felt wrong for a loose wire. He said he would just finish the panel, then leave them to it. The lights steadied after his fix, and the kitchen fans settled into a smoother hum. Maris thanked him too quickly, then walked him back toward the dining room. As they passed the hallway, Dorian saw the keypad light blink, then go dark again. He also saw a thin strip of fresh paint along the doorframe, not matching the older walls. He filed it away as odd, then returned to the register to pay for his breakfast. The windbreaker man at the counter had turned to watch them, and his eyes looked red-rimmed. When Dorian set cash down, the man spoke softly, without turning fully around. He said, "You should not be back there. It is not safe." Dorian asked what he meant, and the man shook his head like he regretted speaking. Maris snapped, "He is leaving, and you are done talking in here." Dorian took his receipt, and the printer finally worked again, as if it waited for him. Outside, the heat hit his face, and the lot looked emptier than before. He walked to his van, and he noticed a second security camera under the eave. It was angled toward the back door, not the customers, which felt deliberate. He started the engine, then hesitated, because the warning from the counter stuck to him. Dorian drove around the building like he meant to find the service entrance for the cooler job. Behind the diner was a fenced area with stacked crates and a rusted shed. He saw the back door, and near it was a fresh set of tire tracks in soft dirt. The tracks were narrow and deep, like a small truck had backed up recently. He also saw a dent in the door, low and wide, like something heavy hit it. He told himself it was none of his business. Then he heard a short burst of sound. It was not a shout, more like a clipped yelp that cut off fast. Dorian killed the engine and listened, and the desert silence made the sound feel louder. He walked toward the fence line, staying near his van, and called out, "Everything okay?" No one answered, but he heard a faint scraping, like a chair dragged across concrete. Dorian pulled his phone and started recording, mostly to prove he was not imagining it. He walked closer to the back door, and he noticed a smell like bleach and warm metal. A small vent near the foundation blew air, and it carried that smell in short puffs. He leaned down and saw the vent screws were new, bright against dirty siding. Then the scraping stopped, and a hush fell so hard it felt staged. The back door opened a crack, and Maris looked out with her face set. She asked what he was doing, and her tone was sharp enough to cut. Dorian said he heard something and wanted to make sure nobody was hurt. Maris said, "You are not helping. You are making it worse." Before he could answer, the windbreaker man appeared behind her in the doorway shadow. The man held one finger to his lips, then pointed down toward the ground near Dorian. Dorian looked and saw a folded napkin stuck under a crate like it had been tossed. Maris did not notice, or pretended not to notice, and she started to close the door. Dorian stepped back and said he was leaving. Then he turned and picked up the napkin fast. He walked to his van without unfolding it, because he did not want them to see. Inside the van, he opened the napkin and found a short message in shaky block letters. It said, "Do not call the diner, call the highway dispatch." Below that, a second line said, "Ask about the tape from 2016. Dorian sat still for a moment, hearing his own breathing over the idling engine. He did not know what highway dispatch meant, but the fear in the handwriting was clear. He drove 2 miles down the road to a wide turnout, then parked behind a broken sign. He called the county non-emergency line, and the operator transferred him to highway dispatch. He told them he was near a diner and had a safety concern, and he asked about a tape. The dispatcher went quiet, then asked for the diner name and the nearest mile marker. Dorian gave what he could, and the dispatcher told him to stay put and keep the line open. Within 10 minutes, 2 highway patrol units rolled in, then a county deputy behind them. Dorian explained everything, including the flicker, the thumps, and the napkin message. He played the short recording from behind the diner, which captured the yelp and scraping. The deputy listened with a blank face, then asked if Dorian had entered the back hallway. Dorian said no, and the deputy nodded like that mattered more than anything else. The patrol sergeant told Dorian he did the right thing, but his tone sounded rehearsed. They asked him to write a statement, and they took the napkin in an evidence bag. Dorian watched them drive back toward the diner, lights off, moving like they wanted surprise. He stayed in his van as instructed, but he could see the diner sign from the turnout. The sign kept buzzing, and each buzz sounded like a warning he could not translate. A half hour later, the deputy called him back on the same number. The deputy said officers were speaking with staff, and there was no immediate threat found. Dorian asked about the message and the tape from 2016, and the deputy paused. He said, "That is old business, and it is not for you." Dorian asked if someone had written the napkin, and the deputy said no one claimed it. Dorian could have left it there, but the whole thing felt like a trap door opening under him. He drove home with his statement copy on the seat, and he did not tell anyone that night. 2 days later, he got a call from an unknown number, and a man spoke without greeting. The man said, "Stop looking. You got lucky, and luck runs out." Dorian asked who it was, but the line went dead before he got another word out. He did not stop looking, but he looked in ways that stayed inside the lines. He filed a public records request for dispatch logs tied to that mile marker and that date. He also searched old local news archives using the diner name and the year from the napkin. What he found was thin and careful, like someone trimmed the story down on purpose. There was a brief mention of a missing drifter, last seen near the highway in 2016. The article described a backpack found in a ditch and a witness who heard arguing near a diner. It did not name staff, and it did not mention any search of the building. Dorian found a second reference in a scanned weekly paper, and it was even shorter. It said the case was unresolved, and the lead detective had transferred out. No follow-up, no closure, and no reason why a random tech would be warned years later. Dorian remembered the camcorder behind the register, and he wondered who controlled that footage. He drove back in daylight on his next week off, choosing a busy lunch hour for cover. The diner looked the same, but a new handwritten sign said cash, only today. Dorian sat in a booth facing the register, and he watched the camera like it might blink. Maris served him without recognition, or she acted like she did not recognize him. A younger server named Lenka Pruitt refilled his coffee, and she seemed nervous in a different way. Lenka was 24 and worked part-time while taking community college classes in a nearby town. Dorian asked if the diner had been busy lately, and Lenka said it depended on who came in. He asked about the camera, and Lenka said the owner watched everything from home. Dorian asked who the owner was, and Lenka said everyone called him Mr. H. She said she never saw his full name on anything. Dorian asked to use the restroom. Then he walked past the hallway like it was an accident. The mop bucket was gone, but the keypad door was still there, clean and freshly painted. He listened with his ear near the wall, and he heard a low humming like a small motor. It was not like an ice machine. It was steadier, like a fan pulling air through a duct. Dorian backed away when Lenka appeared, and she asked if he was lost. He said he was fine. Then he slipped her a folded receipt with his number written on it. He told her to call if she ever felt unsafe, and he kept his voice calm. Lenka stared at the receipt, then tucked it into her apron without a word. Dorian returned to his booth and finished his food, then left cash and walked out. As he crossed the lot, the windbreaker man from before sat in a different car, watching him again. That night, Lenka texted Dorian from a new number, and she used short, careful sentences. She said the owner paid cash under the table and made staff sign weird policy sheets. She said the back office was off limits, and Maris got angry if anyone even joked about it. Lenka said the humming came and went, mostly at night, and the lights sometimes flickered. She also said Keenan never ate in the diner, and he kept his own food in a cooler outside. Dorian asked if Lenka could photograph the policy sheet, and she said she would try. The next day, she sent 2 blurry photos taken in a restroom mirror for privacy. The paper listed rules about phones, cameras, and talking to law enforcement without permission. One line said any contact with outside agencies had to be reported to management immediately. Dorian felt his stomach tighten because diners did not need rules like that. He took the photos to a friend who worked records at the county courthouse named Sutter Hale. Sutter was 45 and handled filing systems, and he knew which requests to avoid. Sutter said the policy sheet looked like something a private security firm might draft. He also said the diner property had changed hands through an LLC, with layers that hid names. Sutter found one older permit tied to a different business, and it mentioned structural ventilation work. The permit date was 2019, matching what Maris had said about the panel. Dorian asked if Sutter could find the contractor name, and Sutter did, after a long pause. The contractor was a small outfit that did industrial ducting for meat processing plants. That did not fit a diner unless someone needed strong airflow for something heavy. Dorian thought about the bleach smell and the fresh vent screws behind the building. He also remembered the tire tracks and the dent in the back door. Dorian went back to the turnout at night, parking where he could see the diner without being seen. He used a cheap directional microphone, the kind wildlife people used for bird calls. He did not point it at windows, he aimed it at the back lot and the vent area. For an hour, he heard normal sounds, trucks on the highway and wind over gravel. Then, near midnight, the humming began, and it rose into a deeper mechanical note. A vehicle backed into the rear lot, and its reverse beep cut through the desert. Dorian saw taillights, low and close together, like a delivery van with a trailer hitch. The back door opened, and 2 figures moved something large on a dolly. The shapes were hidden by shadows, but the dolly wheels squeaked in a steady rhythm. Dorian recorded the sound, then he watched the back door close, and the humming intensified. He did not call the diner, because the napkin message had been clear about that. He called highway dispatch again, and he told them a delivery was happening right now. This time the dispatcher asked if he was the man from last week, and Dorian said yes. The dispatcher said units were already staged, and Dorian felt cold hearing that. Within minutes, dark vehicles rolled off the highway without lights, then stopped behind the diner. Dorian could not see what happened behind the building, but he heard shouting carry across the flat land. He heard one sharp bang, then another, and he could not tell if they were doors or something worse. He heard a woman scream once, then a voice yelled, "On the ground, now!" After that, the sounds turned into radio chatter and short commands that blurred together. The diner sign kept buzzing, and it sounded almost cheerful against the chaos. The next day, local news reported a multi-agency inspection that uncovered code violations and an illegal operation. They did not say what the operation was, only that arrests were made and the property was seized. They showed daytime footage of the diner lot, with evidence tape and workers carrying boxes. They did not show the back hallway, and they did not mention any missing person investigation. Dorian read every article he could find, and none of them explained the humming or the vent work. Lenka texted once more, and her message was short and shaky. She said Maris and Keenan were gone, and nobody could reach them, and staff were told nothing. Lenka said officers asked about an old camcorder tape, and they looked angry when it was missing. She said the windbreaker man was not arrested, but he vanished before questions started. Dorian asked if Lenka was safe, and she said she was leaving town that day. A week later, Dorian got his public records request back, and most of it was denied. One page slipped through, likely by mistake, and it was a dispatch summary from 2016. It mentioned a call from a payphone near the diner, reporting a person locked in a storage room. The call ended abruptly, and officers arrived to find the payphone smashed and the diner closed early. The summary said the responding unit noted a new lock on the back hallway door. It also said the diner owner refused a search, claiming no probable cause. That line matched the keypad door, and it matched the way Maris blocked Dorian in the kitchen. The twist was not a secret tunnel or a monster, it was something more ordinary and uglier. Someone had learned that a diner could hide things in plain sight, using noise and grease as cover. The ventilation work was not for comfort, it was to move air through a space nobody could enter. The humming was not an ice maker, it was a fan system tied to that locked room. Dorian still did not know who wrote the napkin, but he believed the windbreaker man helped. Maybe he had been a witness in 2016, or maybe he had been trapped there too. Dorian also did not know where the missing tape went or what it showed in the last minute. He only knew the diner ran like a stage, and staff were cast into roles they could not quit. When the lights flickered, it was not only a bad wire, it was a warning that something was running. Months later, the building sat empty, and the sign was taken down, leaving a pale outline on the wall. Dorian drove past once and saw weeds pushing through the gravel, reclaiming the lot in slow motion. He thought about how normal the breakfast had tasted and how fast normal turned into threat. He thought about Lenka taking photos in a mirror, trying to help without getting caught. He thought about a payphone call that ended mid-sentence, and how silence can be engineered. Dorian kept doing refrigeration work, and he kept his head down because that felt safest. When he stopped at roadside places, he looked for keypad doors and fresh paint on old walls. He listened for steady humming that did not match the size of the building. He never told the story like a hero, because he did not feel like one. He just felt lucky that a folded napkin landed where he could see it.